Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host or Vice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass. We have an immense pleasure of having two awesome guests of us today. We have Daniel and Adam. Thanks, guys, for attending. And maybe let's just start off with short introductions about you guys. So maybe, Daniel, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure thing. Great to be here. Hello, everyone. So my background is a long-time developer, particularly Java developer. That's kind of where I cut my teeth after I left university. Then I moved more into the ops world, and I've gradually been pulled more into the marketing side of software development these days. That's why I hang out with Adam quite a bit over in New York and at many conferences as well. And I'm really enjoying it. I love bringing the sort of system thinking mindset from I took the engineering days, the architecture mindset into go-to-market motions like developer relations, all that good stuff. And I just love working with developers. So what better job could I have, right?
It's amazing to have you. And Adam?
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. I'm the founder of 10K Media, which used to be billed as a PR agency hyper-focused on DevOps, but more recently as all these things blend, security and Gen AI also. And cut my teeth early days, DigitalOcean and Datadog. And Gremlin was my last in-house job, if you guys are familiar with the chaos engineering thing that spiked and then plateaued, and launched 10K Media in 2020 to help companies in sort of the dev tools universe get their word out. So always happy to chat, and Daniel and I have worked together in the past in many different contexts, so this should be fun.
Yeah, I also had the pleasure of working with Adam multiple times, and I can highly recommend.
Amazing. So now, without any further ado, I think it's time to jump into our first fact. And I believe that fact is by you, Or. So why don't you take it away?
Awesome. So my fact for this episode is that some services have better docs done by competitors or third parties. So examples for this are Auth0 docs for AWS Cognito, or Logz.io or CurlLogic docs for Elasticsearch. I ran into this or realized this as I was reading up on Cognito from AWS. And everywhere, first of all, Cognito is notoriously hard to work with and notoriously has bad docs. And as I was reading about what people think about this on Reddit and elsewhere, people's reaction was go to Auth0, check their docs for Cognito, and people responded to that with, yes, that is the way, which I find very, very interesting and not expected. And it also makes me think, can we use this approach to actually have better docs elsewhere? Writing good docs is challenging no matter what you do. Internally, if you're doing it for open source, if you're doing it just as part of a small application you're building or as part of a bigger project, we always run into issues with building docs. So maybe there are kind of like market alignments or situations where we can leverage competition to get better docs. Maybe if there's a developer that you hate on the other team, maybe you should write the docs for him or vice versa. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Actually, I have a very prime example, or just another example to add to the table here, and it's Docusaurus. Now, Docusaurus is a company that creates the framework for writing your own docs. But very often, their docs are not as good as the documentation you'll find for other companies, even though they're using their framework to write the docs. And I think maybe with most kind of documentation companies, the ones that offer a documentation framework, you'd probably expect that. But it's kind of an interesting example.
Yeah, it's basically an example of the shoemaker going barefoot.
Yeah. I was thinking that too. Yeah, totally right. Yeah. I think two things I've seen in my career, because one, it just evolves organically. Either you or your customers are trying to use a service that's integrated into your service and they can't. So you're like, what am I going to do to fix that? I'm going to write better docs, right? And then we just saw this at Ambassador Labs with the Argo GitOps tool suite. So now folks are bumping to Argo. Argo docs are notoriously kind of a bit challenging too. And our customers were using our product, which had Argo, the open source Argo, built into it. And they were like, hey, we were struggling. So we started writing the docs. And then we were like, hang on, we're ranking better for some of this stuff on Google. This is cool. Right? And then we're like, can we, people are literally searching for Java, Argo or something like that, right? Can we create a page to do that? So in addition to helping the community, we realized it was actually a good go-to-market play,
Yeah. I think that's also with my example, like with Auth0 or Okta as compared to AWS, I think that they intentionally meant for that. I think it was mostly a marketing play. They say, okay, people are looking for Cognito. They see it's bad. They'll look for how to work with it. They'll find us and they'll switch over. Though I'm not sure that that's actually happening. From the comments I read, people are like, okay, I'll go to Auth0. I'll understand through them how to work with Cognito, but I'll stick with it. But maybe there's also a percentage, a quieter percentage that didn't mention that they're moving over.
Is it a good marketing play? Would you want to be a company that has another, I guess solutions to your features and how your app works are written better in another's company documentation? Is that the thing that we might want for marketing, or does that make us look bad in developers' eyes?
Well, I think this reminds me of almost an Ayn Randian virtue of selfishness kind of thing, where you're doing it. There's some altruistic piece of it, but it's coming from a self-interested place a lot of the time. I mean, I remember early days DigitalOcean, content was such a big and community thing for them, and no one knew who they were, and obviously AWS and Azure had much more market share, and so one of the ways they got a lot of attention is just writing a lot of documentation, a lot of tutorials on anything that basically touched infrastructure. If you could do it on a droplet and you could install the technology on top of it or whatever, they would just write documents for everything. And then, there's SEO value, there's community value, but ultimately there was that conversion to revenue, and that wasn't not on purpose, right? And I think that problem today still exists of how do you capture attention and community love, but then translate it into, business. I think it's an interesting conversation.
I don't know if it's good to be the company that other people create docs for you, though there's definitely some cost saving advantages there. But I can definitely say that if you can get attention to yourself today, so no matter what you're building, no matter what you're promoting, as time progresses, it gets harder and harder to get attention. So if there's something of value that you can recognize that you can plug in, especially if I think documentation is the perfect thing to offer for developers, maybe one of the most useful things. So if you can do that, even if it's unclear how you'll end up getting people to engage with you, I'd say go for it. You'll definitely find the potential there, or at least it's very, very likely. That's my 2 cents on it.
I hear you, and I think something just to be aware of for folks listening is do listen to your community as well and the community around it, because I reckon Amazon is so big, AWS is so big, they're kind of like, we don't care that much, right? We've got 1,000 other SKUs or more, 100,000 other SKUs. We don't really care what you're doing there. Or then I'm sure they keep an eye on it. But if the community is not liking what you're doing, go at your own risk. I've seen that in some of the Java world, right? When I was being more developer hat on, certain communities were trying to capture some of the OpenJDK, which is the open source Java implementation. They're trying to capture some of the docs on their own site. And that one, the community read, it wasn't altruistic in any way. Do you know what I mean? It was repurposing the docs. And I won't mention the person's name, company's name, or whatever, but they were getting some not positive vibes, do you know what I mean, for the community. And they did eventually listen, but it took a while. So I do always everyone, you got to make money. Everyone's in business. We're all here for that as well. But listen to the community. Don't annoy the folks that you're trying to help.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the community is kind of what ends up driving your product. They're the ones that end up telling you what's wrong. They're the ones that end up telling you what's right and what they like. And you kind of really have to listen to them to build that trust, right? It's about trust, and about the more trust you can get, the more things that you can kind of offer the community of what they're asking, or maybe their requests, the more you're going to naturally spread the word, and you're going to naturally grow organically. And there's a lot of power in that these days, for sure. Because I think a lot of companies, maybe they're not focusing on community and trying to skip those steps, and they don't end up doing as well. And I've seen it happen multiple times.
I still wonder about if this can be applied internally in a company. Like if you're like a team lead or a chief architect or maybe the VP of R&D, maybe you can. This is a way to get your developers to write better docs.
I like this idea, although, with comms, there's all these, like in external comms, there's always like these debates, don't punch down, punch up. But this sounds a little bit like punching the guy next to you, which is maybe a little concerning, although I get what you're going for.
I don't know, if you keep it friendly, like it's a kerfuffle. It's not an actual fight.
Well, I remember at DigitalOcean also, they wanted their engineers to write more documentation, but part of the challenge there is if their KPIs or their promotions or their financial incentives aren't aligned to doing that, it's harder to get them to do it. So they would actually pay their engineers like a little bonus at the end of like biweekly paychecks, like if they wrote documentation or if they published a tutorial on how to do something, for the engineering blog. And it wasn't much. It was maybe like a few $100 tacked onto their paycheck, but it totally, just that little capital incentive actually did increase output from internal quite a bit.
This actually connects or makes me think of another fact that we had on another episode of Command Shift Left. Always like internal references. So our audience will go and listen to more episodes.
We literally never name the episodes, so they have to go and listen to all of them.
So they have to listen to all of them. Yes, that's the idea. But it makes me think of like how you build the incentives here. And like if you encourage people just to write more docs, it doesn't promise you that you'll get the right docs or good docs. And we mentioned the fact there with I don't remember what was the tech fact, but the underlying one that it made me think of was like the British government in India trying to get rid of rats and then paying for every rat you bring them. So what they ended up is farming more rats. So you ended up having more rats rather than less. So here you might be farming worse docs. Like you'll have more docs, but not the ones that your customers or other developers actually need. So I think it's like getting good incentives for developers for docs as well as for tests are still not something that our best practices are well aligned for. It's still kind of a mystery, or it's either a mystery or you're relying on people that have this tendency to do better docs, but it's hard to find enough of them to cover the space, I think.
Yeah, and maybe we can actually leave that with a question to our audience, and maybe you can kind of ponder on that as you're listening to this episode or after you finish listening, whether maybe giving that little incentive to developers to write better docs would give you better quality documentation, or it would just maybe be done something that is quite last minute and of poor quality. Anyhow, I think at this moment it's a great time to jump onto the second fact, and that second fact is by Adam. So Adam, why don't you take it away?
So the fact that just came across a couple of days ago is ServiceNow did a survey, and they found that 100% of corporate CEOs that they spoke with are considering integrating, generative AI into their businesses and into their applications. And it was couched in a bigger story about ServiceNow. They just had a monster quarter, and the CEO, attributed it to them really leaning into generative AI. But ServiceNow is the kind of company that would have the resources to do that. But I think what was interesting to me about this is I remember the AI fad, let's say more 2016 of AI ops, where there was always a gap between the hype and then the reality in a way. And actually, a lot of companies, I was at Datadog at the time, they refused to use the term, they refused to even say AI was happening. They thought it was too much marketing fluff, while other sort of competitors in the observability space at the time were just, throwing around auto remediation and AI is fixing all your problems and whatever. But this seems, the generative AI stuff, I think what's interesting to me from a comms perspective is there's more alignment between hype and companies seriously either being forced to consider it or they actually are excited to consider it. But either way, they have to reckon with it. In other words, it seems to be much more real. And so if the hype was last year, it seems like a lot of companies are embracing it this year, or at least trying to figure out how to.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because I had a thought a few days ago. Because the more I browse the web looking at new companies, the more I see that each company is implementing some AI into their software. And I started to think, are they doing it because this is actually useful? Or are they doing it because it's one of the things that just brings more hype and makes maybe more people interested in what it is? And I came across some companies, I'm not going to name their names, but the AI they were offering is just a load of crap. It was just like it didn't benefit me in any way. It just makes something that I would do normally a little bit more fancy. It's nothing that comes out and like a shining star. I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. No, there's none of that. So I think there is a little bit of marketing play going on, or actually maybe not even a little bit, but a lot of marketing play from companies introducing an AI aspect into their tools.
I definitely agree. I think there's still a significant amount of fluff out there, but it's just a matter of time. There's a clear trend of this accelerating, and if we zoom out, like not a lot. If we look at the singularity we're headed towards, like if we listen to Ray Kurzweil, it's just 21 years away, right? So by then, this thing is going to become a reality, and probably before. So yes, there's still fluff, but the percentage of fluff, I think, is shrinking. But on the other end, you do see that there's a lot of fake outs. So a lot of companies are basically just taking ChatGPT and just pushing it into something. Yes. And you get this kind of abomination of like, oh, there's a real intelligence here, in real intelligence that I can talk to, but it doesn't really understand what's going on. It's just kind of embedded into something, not really connected to it. And you can also see people abusing it. So I saw this post from a guy using the Chat GPT embedded for Chevrolet's, I think, customer service. And he basically said, why do I need to pay for a ChatGPT license when I can just use this one that they're paying for, instead of asking questions about the car? He's just asking the agent there to do like math problems and calculations.
That's really funny. Well, actually, maybe a quick counterpoint though of the, kind of just implementing ChatGPT and pretending like you're doing something crazy. But I think actually starting small and doing something simple is actually an interesting way to approach this. My former client, Jelly Incident Response, they were just acquired by PagerDuty. But one of the last sort of announcements I did with them was in this, space. And under the hood, it was pretty simple. It was basically, they called it status updates within Slack and their IR bot, where basically, an incident kicks off, it spins up a channel, people have a conversation. And then when you join the channel as a newcomer to the incident, the ChatGPT basically summarizes all of the conversations that happened before. So you get up to speed in a few sentences and you don't have to read the whole history of chat. And like, not it's a relatively straightforward, basically resell of ChatGPT, but it had a very practical use case that actually was real, that people could use pretty quickly out of the box.
In fairness, Adam, I think that's pretty much what ServiceNow did, right? Because I had a little ponder. I saw it in Ed Sim's newsletter at the weekend. That folks subscribe to Ed Sim's newsletter. He's awesome from Bold Start. But he was like championing this, and I had a little poke around at the SKU they mentioned, Pro Plus, and basically it was using ChatGPT to summarize tickets. When you chat to a bot and on the website and say, hey, I'm stuck on this stuff, and like often a human has to take over, but the sheer amount of information, just like an incident, is crazy, right? And it was obviously a made-up example I was watching the video of, but I was like, to your point, I was like, simple API call, you chuck all this data and go, summarize this for me. But I was like, you know what? I've worked in select call centers in the past, right? This stuff would be freaking awesome. Because when you're reading some like massive transcript as a human, takes you like a long time to like read it. Then you got to parse it, build a mental model. Exactly the problems with incidents. Like ServiceNow, I was like, fair play to these folks. Like they put a very simple API, but provided a ton of value, and they're Gen AI friendly now. Like their CEOs, folks buying this stuff can go, yeah, I'm getting into Gen AI, right?
I think another side of this is that, well, this can be a powerful solution that fits like with ServiceNow, as I agree, makes sense. And while it fits in a lot of places, I don't think it fits for every scenario. Like, I don't want to type into a chat or talk to someone for every problem I have. Some things I'd rather just press a button or have a simpler interface. So for example, with us and with Permit.io, where both Philip and I work, a lot of people have suggested, oh, why don't you have a chat GPT kind of generate the policy? I can describe the policy for it, and it'll do it for me. And I was like, yeah, that's an interesting idea. But when you actually think about it, it's easier to check the check boxes that we have in the simplified UI instead of trying to describe it and then seeing if what the chat GPT created is actually the right policy you wanted. So I think we're also kind of suffering from a situation where a person with a hammer sees nails all over. So maybe we also need to start thinking of how we provide other interfaces to work with AI. I know there are some companies that are working on that, but I think that area is still very, very in its infancy. But I guess we'll have to see how it goes.
That's an interesting point about, the complexity of the task of what you're doing and mapping that to what the appropriate UI is. Because on the other side, one of my clients, Kentic, they're launching Kentic AI on Wednesday, January 31st. So I assume that's before this podcast will actually go out. But, so they were talking about, it's an observability tool. I'm trying to understand your networks and just democratizing. There was an example that just happened where even if you wanted to say, show me all the traffic coming in from NATO countries, right? Well, first you'd have to go and Google what those NATO countries are and get a list of them. Then you would have to go and know how to apply those filters within Kentic, which already can be difficult, and set up the query the right way. But now you could use the natural query interface to say, show me the traffic, whatever, and then it'll do it behind the scenes and provide the map and whatever. So I think, the complexity of the prompt essentially could determine what it makes sense. And I could see people going too far with the Gen AI stuff and actually lowering the quality of the developer experience. It's an interesting point.
I think a key thing I'll mention is understandability is really good, because your example, I don't want to describe the policy perhaps in natural language, but having it read back to me in natural language could be really valuable, right? This policy targets all NATO countries, users with it. Because I'm looking at, back in the days, AWS IAM rules, and it was so hard to understand the IAM rule. And then I want to tweak it. What's the impact of that tweak? And like that, I want to actually use code to express it, because I love code, right? But I would love someone to go to me, read to me what it means and what the impact is. So to both of your points, all about the interface and the kind of job to be done. I talk a lot about jobs to be done in my work. And what's the job to be done here? Is it quick config? It's algorithmic, it's precise, or is it more natural language? I want to understand something.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the end of the day, it's really about finding the right balance for every task. Maybe the solution would be to have an AI that knows how to find the right balance and figure out more AIs for us to embed it to the system and rinse and repeat ad infinitum or until we reach the singularity, which I think the same thing. And I think as we mentioned the singularity already twice on this question, I think it's a perfect time to move to our next fact. And that fact belongs to Daniel. Daniel, take it away.
Yeah, so my fact is that Gartner predicts by 2026, 80% of software engineering organizations will establish platform teams as internal providers of reusable services, components, and tools for application delivery. I thought it was fascinating for many reasons. First thought was pretty much every company I've worked at as an engineer and architect had some form of platform capability. Even if it wasn't a platform team, it was a platform capability. So I wondered, is platform engineering having its kind of DevOps moment? Do you know what I mean? Well, we'd all been doing DevOps for a bunch of years, but when we labeled it as DevOps, suddenly products started popping up, everyone's doing DevOps, right? So I'm kind of wondering now, and also on the hype curve that Gartner publishes, I think platform engineering is about to ride the roller coaster down to the trough of disillusionment, right? And a lot of clients I work with are in the platform engineering space, and I'm kind of thinking, this is intriguing. When Gartner gets involved, it's always good, it's always bad.
First thing I want to ask is, wait a minute, isn't platform engineering DevOps? And wait a minute, isn't DevOps just IT? And wait a minute, isn't IT just you coupling something together? So
yeah, it's an interesting point. I'm worried I'm going to have to rebrand 10K Media from DevOps to platform engineering now. So this debate is interesting, and I love seeing how different vendors have to interface with these trends, right? Like, do we say DevOps is dead, right? That was something I saw a lot. And they might not even mean it, but they're trying to find a way to, interface with these new terms. But Daniel, I know you've worked pretty intimately with an internal development platform at your prior gig, right? So
yeah, I'm working with clients now as well, on this space. I totally see the value in terms of we've been doing this kind of thing for years. Like, as a developer, you always need some way to build your thing, to ship it and to run it and observe it and make sure it's secure and all those good things, right? And now I think the good part of platform engineering, and it is sort of building on DevOps and building on IT, to your point, or is just systematizing this stuff and refining it. That's great, right? But at the same time, there's a danger of like reheating the old soup. Do you know what I mean? We do keep stirring the pot and that's probably okay. Chuck a few more ingredients in. Yeah, probably be okay. And like that bit of it is a bit suspect, right? But yeah, lots of folks I'm working with are trying to make it easier for people basically to deliver value to their customers. And I love that, right? I can't mention any client names at the moment. I'll in the future, I'll give a shout out to some folks. I'm really excited. Just started a new client last week, actually. And they're doing some really cool platform engineering stuff. So I definitely see a lot of value in it. But I think it is sort of early days. But when Gartner gets involved, the enterprise follows, and the enterprise brings different expectations, different personas, different, nothing bad about it per se, but like there's just, a change of thought processes is going to be going on in this space, right?
Yeah, Gartner coming in is kind of like the parents coming to the party and saying, "Hey, cool kids, we're hip too."
That's a great analogy.
We're doing agile now, right? Or platform engineering. Yeah, that's the thing. Look at me dance. But jokes aside, I kind of want to double click on something you said. I think it would be interesting for me to better understand. So you said reusable services. So when you say reusable, what does that actually mean or entail?
Yeah, so I saw in a lot of organizations where I was a developer, we do everything custom, everything bespoke. And as the new technologies came in, we do it again. So I remember I worked on tin back in the day, like racking and stacking servers. And then we sort of provisioned them. And then you saw the same thing come along with like Chef and Puppet for automation. Now you're seeing, the next level Terraform.
I'm having flashbacks over here.
Totally, you're right. We've all been through those things. So, I mean, I think that's kind of where I'm coming from with that angle. Do you know what I mean? Like sort of history repeating itself. But if you can... the services provide a lot of value. If you get the interface right, it prevents folks from constantly having to reinvent that wheel. They can build on your services, build maybe other services, and before you know it, you're adding like serious value without having to sort of reinvent the further down the stack.
So what do you actually have to do to meet the mark? It's like if I have a service that you can spin up on Kubernetes with a Helm chart. Is that reusable, or if something that I can easily deploy over Argo CD with a template? Is that reusable? Who's the person, or what's the standard that comes in and says this service is reusable, this service is not so much? How do you actually set the line there?
Yeah, I think the analogy or the saying we have is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I think service automation is kind of in the eye of the beholder too, because different companies do apply different things. But I think there's a bunch of things, if you want to reuse something, is there a clear API or experience, like you were mentioning, button press, to do that thing? Yeah. Does it require significant modification? Because we've all seen those promises on many aspects of our life, right? Where you're like, yeah, just keep reusing it. And then you're always doing something extra to kind of make it reusable. And I think then, and can you build something on top of it is often the thing for me too, right? Is it like a component to kind of compose some other stuff going on? I think if you crack those three things, that's a good sign that it's reusable to we all agree that's kind of reusable to a good level.
Right.
So reusable kind of means that whatever we're working on is fairly flexible and it works better than we expected it to work.
Yeah, I guess, and it saves us time. Do you know what I mean? Because if we can, because that's the worst thing when you're trying to reuse something and then it adds more time, or you've got to spend so much time understanding it. That's not really a good look as well, right? I think the definition, exactly what you said, Philip. Yeah, with that sort of caveat being that you are 80% of the work is done for you, maybe 90% of the work is done for you.
Mm-hmm. I saw Microsoft have a good analogy for this, where you're, I don't know, walking through a a field or whatever. And it's as more people go through it, they start to develop paths and then safety precautions, and and then you have a path to walk down where you're getting to where you want to go more reliably. I think there's also an interesting, I'm not a developer, so this would be a question for you guys, but like the balance between empowering your developers by setting parameters that actually let them move faster versus imposing too many parameters that actually may annoy them or hinder their autonomy. It reminds me for some reason of in New York, there was a liquor store I used to love, because in the suburbs where my folks are, you go into these liquor stores and they're just like endless options. It's like, thousands and thousands of bottles for every category. But this was a little tiny one where basically what they did is they had every category, gin, whiskey, vodka, whatever. And they just had 3 bottles for each. They recommended all of them, but one bottle was the cheapest. If you're just like, one was middle of the road and the other is top shelf. And they said you can pick from these things. And actually it made your life so much easier. You go into a nice event, you want a nice one, you pick the top shelf bottle of the spirit they like, and it's good. And you could just move versus just like this endless warehouse of options. And so anyway, I'm curious how that sort of like autonomy versus, restrictions works for the developer experience.
Yeah, you're touching on I'd say a very sensitive point, especially with companies that are starting to adopt platform engineering or DevOps. There's, what are you allowing all of your engineers to do? What are you limiting to specific teams? What are you allowing only the DevOps team to work on? And here there's also kind of that mixture of, are you doing DevOps by meaning everyone's doing ops, or the devs are doing ops, or you have that kind of separate group that is dedicated to serve a platform for the rest of the team. And it creates a lot of tensions. A lot of times, like when companies are going through that motion, it creates a lot of frustration, because the engineers were used to just running things on production directly, or at least on staging directly, and suddenly they're not allowed to, and they're like, I built this entire thing here. The only reason this is running is because I put the effort into it. And now you're telling me that I can't run things on production? Who the hell do you think you are? So you get a lot of that. And honestly, I don't know what is the right answer. I find that different companies end up at different balance points. For me, I really, it boggles my mind, the idea that some people are limited from doing ops, or you have people that are not supposed to have the entire skill set and are like, you put them into a little box. I find that very contrarian for what we usually want from an engineer. Like, you want the full stack engineer, you want the 10x engineer that can go end to end. And this type of approach is kind of almost opposite to it. But again, maybe it's kind of what I mentioned before, it's about balances, and I think different companies need different balance points.
I think the kind of right approach, maybe, well, in my opinion, would be to kind of give developers the option of different pathways to take, but keep those pathways very strict. So then, going back to your example, Adam, about picking the different options of the type of alcohol, you find something that you're always happy with, you have the options, and you actually know that you'll probably never go wrong. One of those will suit you better. So it's kind of giving the developer options, making sure they're happy, but kind of really guiding them on the right pathway to make sure that, security and other things that are important in the company are being met and are being controlled.
I like your analogy a lot, Adam. And as you were talking, I had flashbacks of some companies I've worked at. People like rock up to that store and they've got their own still, right? They want to brew their own stuff. Do you know what I mean? And they're looking like, where can I buy the hops? Where can I buy the? Do you know what I mean? I said, like, proper OSS developer. I'm building primitives here, right? And to your point, Philip, you got to say, no, as in, you could totally do your own thing at a certain level, but that still has got to go. You're not brewing your own stuff, right? You're buying some booze here. You're not. So I thought that was a great analogy. I might have to use that one, Adam, because the other thing I thought is, unfortunately, in our space, people aren't super sensitive to things like cost at the moment. Do you know what I mean? So you have your 3 examples, but you say to folks, that's cheap, that's middle, that's expensive, top shelf. We haven't really, I know there's a few folks you've worked with and I've worked with in the FinOps space that are getting their heads around this, right? But once we do crack that, I think your analogy is perfect, right? Because you literally could go, I want to spend top dollar on this logging service, but I actually want to go cheap on whatever, do you know what I mean? But at the moment, folks can't really make that call because they kind of don't know the costs, right? That's why they want to build their own stuff. Sometimes they're like, oh, I could classic Hacker News, I can build that in a weekend. I can build it cheaper. Probably you can, right? But I appreciate the kind of the vibe you're going for there.
This also makes me think of a potential dystopian future where you sign up as a developer to a company and then they tell you, oh, you can take our regular production path that doesn't come with any extra charges, but you're limited in the how you go about deployment. Or you can subscribe to our Production Plus program. It will cost you will take off your paycheck, but you'll be able to deploy a lot faster.
That's crazy, right? Yeah, I can imagine that.
I can definitely imagine this happening because there's a lot of companies that, I'd call them scams actually, that try to make most of their money. Actually, most scamming companies, that's the way they work. They fool their own representatives that are supposed to scam people, and they tell them that they're getting basically a smaller percentage of the money. They're convincing them to take less money and do more work. So I can definitely see some malicious software companies, maybe gaming companies. I can definitely see a company like Ubisoft or something like that going that path, or Activision Blizzard at the state that is in today. Hopefully, Gen AI would come in fast enough and this won't happen because everyone will be replaced by those agents. And I think this is a very critical mark and cue that we should move to our next fact. And that one, if I'm not mistaken, belongs to you, Philip.
Yes, it is. And my fact for today is that developer advocacy, a role that we start to see becoming more prominent in all companies, has actually originated from the open source movement. And I find this actually very interesting, being a developer advocate myself, because it's a role I haven't heard of maybe 4 or 5 years ago, or at least it was something that nobody talked about. It was maybe individual people that had that role and were participating and performing their actions in a company for that specific role. Now, the reason a developer advocate actually originated, because in open source projects, early developers, they often kind of took the role of advocating that open source project or the software that they've built, not just by writing the code of that software, but also actually engaging with the community and building a community around it, trying to get people to actually write more code, to help them, to grow the project. And that's kind of where this community building, this word spreading, this teaching kind of aspect or advocating aspect came in. But now I'm kind of thinking about the future of developer advocacy and how it's going to evolve. Now, we often kind of see this role as something that's quite important to companies because of the fact of spreading the word, right? You're kind of trying to teach developers, not in a kind of marketing way, to tell them, hey, this is important and maybe you should use it. And here are all the reasons why you should use it. So you're kind of giving them the fundamentals of understanding why it's maybe important. So you're advocating. Now, we are starting to talk more about AI and kind of ethics and how AI kind of can be ethical in some way or maybe unethical when it comes to development. And I find that there might be a lot of discussion kind of building around the responsibilities and kind of the ethical use of technology and how we're going to use it. Now, I can imagine multiple ways how we can start to use AI that is unethical. And then the roles that a developer advocate takes up, we kind of, because we're telling the people how maybe they should use the software or what's good about the software, we're kind of maybe going to start to curve how we talk about software in general and about how ethical it is and maybe how we should use it. So I'm kind of leaving a question for you guys of what you think about kind of the unethical aspect of developer advocacy, basically, because I'm sure there's going to be one. And how do we maybe battle it?
I was sure what you're going to say when you started talking about Gen AI. I was sure you're going to say, well, obviously developer advocates would be replaced by large language models that will advocate. And obviously when those will advocate, what they'll advocate you do is use more large language models. And I think that's not ethical. Obviously, they're just trying to procreate by fooling you into using them. But you actually posed an interesting question here, which I don't know. I need to think a little bit more about. Like, as software is basically continuing to eat our world, everything is becoming more and more software driven. there's more and more things that you can control with software, and also control in ways that are not necessarily altruistic, as we maybe use the term before.
It's actually interesting because I know that a lot of developer advocates are also content creators, like myself. And a lot of the time, we and other, developer advocates, they film tutorials and videos that get to a very large audience very, very quickly. So in general, there is a big impact that we have here. Now, what would happen in a case where, for example, all of the developer advocates would get together and suddenly they would start to, say something to drive software in the wrong direction, or to drive how we do things in the wrong direction, which would, at some point, have an impact on specific companies, because obviously engineers would come, they would hear it, they'll be like, oh yeah, this is probably the way I should go about it because so many people are talking about it, and they would start to implement it. But what if it was wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think there's kind of two things here. I think one is, we're almost speaking in Orwellian terms, like the developer advocate, as if it's just like Big Brother, like this one sort of glob. But, I assume developer advocates have different opinions, and then there will be a competing, market for that. But I think another problem is sort of like who watches the watchers, right? As if the developer advocate is this penultimate authority on ethics. I'm not sure that's how it works. I actually have a funny example from KubeCon Valencia related to this point. This was like kind of, I think COVID was sort of starting to wane, but it was still a real issue. And I don't know if you guys remember, but the CNCF basically had very, strict COVID guidelines in place, masks everywhere, whatever. And then ahead of KubeCon Valencia, they said that they're just going to map their policies to whatever the local government's policies are, because it was very hard to have your own policies that contradicted with the local government's policies. And anyway, some developer advocates, I won't name names, caused such a shitstorm, for lack of better words, on Twitter about any sort of laxing of COVID and everyone needs a mask everywhere, even whatever. And then at the event, I was at a bar where, because it was in Valencia in Spain, the masks were off, whatever. And this developer advocate came in with a group of other developer advocates, no masks, at the bar, hanging out, like totally separate from what they were advocating for actually on Twitter, that everybody needed to be wearing masks. And I was like, wow, you didn't even, what you were saying publicly wasn't even mapping to what you were actually doing. And so it's just this idea that the developer advocate is the gatekeeper for ethics. I'm actually like a little skeptical of that, but I'm curious. I don't know who could play that role though,
You think that's bad? You should see what SDK they used. It wasn't the SDK that they promoted.
One thing I'd say on this, because I've sort of done the DevRel job, obviously, at a couple of places, and I think we're amplifiers, to your point, Philip, and to your point, Adam, as well. I definitely think we look to folks like, say, Rebecca Parsons or Martin Fowler, or pick your sort of celeb, right? Sam Newman, there's a bunch of other folks, right? But I do take your point, Philip, in terms of we are often the more content creators in this space, right? But I think to your point, Adam, I can very quickly see sort of the thought leaders, for want of a better phrase, jumping in if we were promoting something that was a bit out of sort of character or off band, right? Because we've seen that even a few times, where I think that's why DevRel gets a hard rap. Like, DevRel done well is purely an enabler. This is the way you use our software. Everyone wins. I get some business value. You get some business value. Happy days. DevRel done bad is like shilling, basically, right? Or marketing, or even false promises. I think there's always some of that, but I've seen some of the really bad DevRel being called out by folks actually trying to consume the content or use the tools. And they were like, what's this person doing? Like, they're writing stuff that doesn't make sense. And I think is a healthy tension between the folks that can, and I'm not saying developer DevRel folks can't, but as in often the folks that amplify what the folks can do. Does that make sense? Like, someone will create the SDK and then we're sort of promoting it and saying you can do all this cool stuff with it. And I think we both, it's a bit of checks and balances, right? We keep each other in line.
Yeah, well, and I think, Philip, a general trend though of it being perhaps expected or a norm for developer advocates to take into consideration ethics, I think that is good, right? Like, even if,
that.
they aren't like some ultimate authority, but their job, or at least, it'll become typical of their job to take it into consideration and talk about it, and people can disagree, but there's a public discourse around it. I think that's probably good. Yeah.
Yeah, big plus. Well, I think ethics in general need to be thought about. The engineers arguably have even more impact. They're the one building the software, plugging in the ML models, right? I think we are from the application vehicles in DevRel, but I think we need to listen to our customers, listen to the community, and feed that back to the engineers. Say, hey, have you encountered bias? How are you coding around bias? What's that kind of stuff, right? So I think it goes both ways. And I think if we went too far off, like Philip, to your point, we'd probably get nudged back. But I think I 100% support what Adam's saying. And I've always in my career thought of ethics to some degree, but now even more so. The reach we can have, the ease you can spin stuff up, the impact you can have, it's a responsibility as an engineer these days, right?
Yeah, I think you have to be extremely careful what you say and how you say it, just to make sure that, first of all, whatever you're saying is actually correct. Because it's very easy to make a mistake, especially, for example, when you're teaching software, right? Before you say something, you have to really have it, under your wing and understand what you're saying. Because I 100% agree, as soon as you say something wrong, you'll get the thought leaders or the leaders in the space absolutely calling you out for it. And you don't want that.
I have to say that personally, I'm not worried. I don't believe in the developer advocacy cabal that's controlling all of us. Developer advocates are usually developers first and foremost, and that means that they can't agree on anything. They can't even agree if we should use dark theme or light theme or tab spaces. Yeah, totally. Should we use Go? Should we use Rust? They're never going to agree on how to unify their cabal to control us all. That being said, I completely agree with the other point here that was already kind of highlighted, ethics being part of our work today. I think as a main theme of our podcast, everything is shifting left. Developers, as things are becoming more complex, the skill set of understanding the software is needed more and more, and so everything is shifting left. So understanding ethics as well and being able to build that into your software is something that I think is unavoidable and only increase with time. And we actually covered a little bit or versions of this in other Command Shift Left episodes. So, for example, we had an episode where the fact about how you make sure that your AWS account or the application you're running on the AWS is not just performant and optimized, it's also carbon footprint optimized. And your responsibility, not just to your company and to the quality of your software, but to the quality of your planet and the lives we live in it.
Well, yeah, that's amazing. Well, and not to add another level of complexity, but I think there's a legitimate case to be made about the AI itself may be needing an advocate. And this might be going to, this would need another podcast perhaps, but the idea that if in the future AI does become conscious or sentient in some way, making sure that you're not creating worlds for the AI itself where the AI is experiencing something negative. So not just the impact on the human conscious experience, but actually on the conscious experience of the AI itself. People do need to be thinking about these things, and if philosophers are talking about it, it's kind of too late, right? Because they're not the ones building it. It's got to be sort of baked in. I like this shift left ethics kind of conversation, or this converges a lot of my interest into one quick soundbite. So.
And I think we kind of left the audience with really a lot to think about through this podcast episode. So I think this would be the perfect moment to actually wrap it up. Adam, Daniel, thank you so much for being the guests on our show, and thank you for your time and your amazing facts that you shared with the audience today. And as always, to the audience, we'll see you in the next episode.
I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it. Hey, it's Philip. There is a few little things I quickly want to add. If you enjoy Command Shift Left, make sure you leave us a rating on the platform you are streaming from. We will be eternally grateful. If you are not doing so already, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn by typing in @JustShiftLeft, all one word, for any updates and new episode releases. Finally, this podcast is fully supported by Permit.io, of which me and Or work at, so make sure you go ahead and check out Permit if you need a simple solution to implement authorization. That's all, and we will see you in the next episode.